today's presentation, we're going to be talking about standards and modern applications. My name is Dan Orkin, co-founder and CEO of Envision Blockchain. I'll get to what we do towards the end of the presentation. Anais, if you could just take a couple seconds and just introduce yourself.
Sure. So I am Anaïs Souffrant. I'm the founder of Conscianimis Consulting. So we are an operations consulting practice, and we specialize in the delivery of post-acquisition IT integration programs. And I'm very happy to be on the webinar with you today.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining. And, just to go over the agenda, 3 quick points, what we hope to cover within these 30 minutes over here. So we're going to be talking about the importance of standards. Anais is then going to provide updates on the formation of the baseline protocol specifications documentation. And then lastly, we're going to do a walkthrough of the new baseline protocol reference implementation called BRI-1. I'm not going to steal any thunder from point number 2, and excited to talk about number 3. But let's kind of take half a step back here, and you might have joined this webinar because you're interested in the baseline protocol. You might have joined this presentation because you're just interested in a modernization initiative in your current organization. So, you may be thinking, what is the baseline protocol? So in the event that you haven't heard of it, earlier this year, if you take a look at the screenshot on the left-hand side, there was a big press announcement that came out, looking here, March 4th of 2020, where Microsoft EY Consensus put out this open source project, if you will. And this project is around using the mainnet as this common frame of reference. So you might have heard something about the baseline protocol in the past. It's really this advancement in blockchain and cryptography in order for these business organizations to be able to work together in a way that they can still maintain this common frame of reference while not really disrupting their current business processes. And we'll get to more about that in a second, right? But I think what's just important here to note from a technology perspective is that, if you can see my screen right here, we have, for example, you have one business, which is using Microsoft Dynamics 365 for their system of record. Then they have, a business partner, for example, that they're working with that's using SAP, another one that could be using Salesforce, another one that could be using Oracle. And each of them have this baseline protocol stack implemented as well, right? So you have this system of record implementation, you have a baseline protocol stack, and now you're keeping the records that are important in your process, and you're using a mainnet to be able to keep everything in sync. Right. So again, you're baselining when you have 2 or more systems that store data and run business logic in a verified state of consistency. So here's just a quick screenshot of what the baseline protocol repository looks like as of this morning. If you go there, keep in mind, so we'll be talking about specifically, what's inside that core folder. We're also going to be talking about in this presentation what's inside the examples, right? So this is a quick little primer at the end of the presentation. We also have a whole collection of links to help you navigate your way around the baseline protocol. So if you're interested in receiving that, kind of like a cheat sheet, feel free to either type in here, letting us know that you want us to send you a copy, or just reply back to, any of the emails that you got from us over here, or send an email to info@envisionblockchain.com. We'd be happy to send across that cheat sheet. So, as we have been introducing the baseline protocol at Envision Blockchain, the common question that we get from our customers is, okay, so we went to the repository, we saw that there's a whole bunch of code, we saw some demos, right? So we saw that you worked within the community, put out a demo for integrating SAP and Microsoft Dynamics, right? But how do we implement the baseline protocol for ourselves? When you take a look at this, right, it's just like any other project. You need to think about your business use case design at first. Then we're going to get a little bit of the technicals in, right? So then you need to build a provider and then you need to connect and deploy the solution. This is at the very high level. And at the end of the presentation, we would have hoped that the information that we provide to you is going to help you, put all this here together. And this is why we think that standards is really the next step of the maturity of this, because if you take a look at the Crossing the Chasm, all popular book, right, there was this thought process where the pragmatists don't trust visionaries as a reference, right? So, as mainstream adoption happens, you really want to see that there's less risk, that there's less bugs, that there's standards that are implemented. You're not the first one to do this, and there's been a lot of thought behind that. So with that in mind, the baseline community got together and we started to now think through the different standards and the different components and the different APIs and all that all wrapped together, so that as this is being introduced to businesses that want to adopt blockchain, that want to adopt cryptography, that want to be able to modernize their systems, there's some documentation behind that. So with that in mind, what I would like to do is pass the mic over to Anais, and if you could take it from here for the next couple of slides.
Sure. So when we talk about the baseline protocol specifications, it is important to highlight the framework under which they are being developed. So the baseline protocol is an OASIS open source initiative, and the release of the v0.1 reference implementation at the end of August was really the milestone that triggered the beginning of the official OASIS standards development. So as you said, the community is really the driving force behind this, and as open standards, well, once completed and published, the baseline standards should remain publicly available. So currently the team, including yourself, myself, and the wider baseline community, we are working on two standards. On one side, the baseline core specification, and on the other side, the baseline API data model specification. So at high level, the core document will provide the set of functional and non-functional requirements so that two or more system of records can maintain data consistency and workflow continuity by using the mainnet as a common frame of reference. So this is a key focus, to define those requirements in standard 1. Now the second standard, the API and data model document, will describe the baseline programming interface, the expected behavior of all instances of this interface, as well as its data model. So one of our priorities, and you mentioned it before, has been to abstract and define the key components for each of those standards. So as shown on this slide, for the first standard, we are currently discussing 7 items, and I will present them very briefly. So of course, the first one is the API, the baseline API standard, and I will provide a short overview on the next slide. On the second item is the communication component, and it captures the requirement on our parties, so our different companies, different businesses that engage in baselining. How do they send and receive message securely? So authentication, authorization, and message delivery requirements. Our third item, our privacy and confidentiality component, focuses on the requirement to deliver on the commercial confidentiality and transaction privacy requirements. The fourth is our agreement execution component, and this is really where we will have to abstract the functionalities provided by smart contracts. So here we are really talking about business logic execution, workflow verification requirements, and all those things. The governance component is more about the definition of the governance rules and the processes for each of the layers of the baseline protocol. The security consideration is a bit of an interesting one because actually it will not provide requirements, but it will present and discuss key security items that we have identified as important when deploying a baseline implementation. So again, it's not that we are saying those are the security requirements that need to be implemented, but for people who want to implement the protocol, those are security topics that you really need to think about. And last, but as important, the conformance component that will really state what are the clauses in the test that are required for an implementation to achieve baseline compliance. So this is a bit more straightforward because the API standard relies heavily on what has been developed and what has been made available in the v0.1 reference implementation. So just as a side note, and as you showed earlier as well in the screenshot, this can be found on the baseline GitHub repo. So as you can see here, the API standard will provide the list of interfaces. So iBaseline, iRegistry, iVault, iBlockchain, and all of those will need to be used when doing a baseline implementation. And of course, we will include the description of the data model required. So to conclude this overview, the work on the baseline standard is just getting started. So there is really an opportunity for those interested to come and join us in that journey.
Great, thank you for that. You know, this is a work in progress. It's this whole presentation is really more of a call to action to jump into the community and add your thought process into it. What's so great about the open source community, and we'll show you this in the next couple slides, is that realistically, you know, as the minds start working together towards a common goal, we can now take bits and pieces of this and apply that to our own businesses and our own different ideas, right? Whether they're use case specific, horizontally focused, or anything along those lines, right? So again, everything that we're presenting today is a work in progress. It's a call to action to jump in, lean in, take what this is and twist it in a way that it could really benefit what you're doing. So to kind of move this forward now is kind of the last part of this presentation is, okay, so we have the open source repository. And on top of that, there's now standards being developed. There's reference implementations that are being done. There's demos in the work, right? But how do we put this all together, right? Because the one thing that we wanted to help answer is, you know, that question is, how do we implement the baseline protocol for ourselves? How do we make use of that? So for this, Provide platform put together a reference implementation called BRI-1, standing for Baseline Reference Implementation. And the use case was meant to be really, really simple. You know, like let's not overcomplicate this. So this is a use case where there's two organizations. Let's just call them Alice and Bob, or Alice Corp and Bob Corp, right? These are the two icons that are sitting across from each other. They're establishing a work group. We'll explain what that is in the next couple slides. And essentially, what they want to do is baseline an in-memory record. So let's not worry about in-memory record or anything like that, right? Let's just keep things very simple. There's a document that the two companies want to maintain in a state of consistency, right? So for that, remember that screen that I was showing you at the beginning, that there's this dynamic system, there's this SAP system, the Salesforce system, et cetera, and then that there's a baseline stack part of it, right? So this is kind of what a stack of that would look like, right? So there's the baseline stack, there's the provide platform stack, right? And this is now sitting in, you know, Alice Corp's cloud of choice. So they may be an AWS customer, whereas, for example, Bob Corp over here might be an Azure customer. And I think a good way to describe this is to actually show this in action, right? So there's a demo here that I'm just going to go ahead and play for the next 3 minutes over here, and let's talk about what we see after this. All right, so I'm going to mute the sound, and I'm just going to talk through it here. So here, right, we're showing the repository. And again, this is a subfolder under examples under BRI-1, and you'd be able to see it. So this is a split screen. On the left-hand side, we're running the command. On the right-hand side, we're showing some of the logs. And again, on the left-hand side, you'll see the requirements that are being implemented. What we did was we linked the requirements to the standards that we were talking about from the standard 1 and the standard 2. And notice over here, as now these two parties are beginning to baseline their document, so to say, right? So there's, if you take a look at the section over here, you have baseline work group creation, right? So you'll be able to see in the left-hand side, right, all the checks as these requirements are being deployed, right? These are the actual deployment actions that are happening. You can see the time that it actually took for these actions to be deployed. Okay, so we're going through here. Now, Bob Corp is setting up the work group because Bob, and we'll get to this in a second, Bob is initiating this. He's inviting Alice Corp to baseline the documents that's important for their business use case, right? So here again, we have all these logs that are falling in from the right-hand side, listening to all these different messages that's happening. Bob is all set. You could see there's contracts, things that are happening, there's messaging, things that are happening, registrations that are happening, Vault, we'll explain what that is in a second, right? So now we're inviting participants to the work group. So now Bob is inviting Alice to baseline that record of hers, right? So again, the information is sitting as if it's in two different environments. You have two companies that want to work together, right? So here, so we're inviting the participants to the work group. Things are being set up in the background. Again, these are the requirements for the specific implementation. Okay, so it's running through. It's running through, it's setting up, and we're going to explain in the next slide, you know, what exactly it's setting up. We'll let it run through. There we go. Alice is almost all set. And there you go. So Alice is all set. And again, you know, this particular demo is showcasing how you essentially, you know, start this whole baselining process, okay? It's not saying now that there's other things that you could do, and that's where, you know, a use case implementation is really going to help out. But let's grip onto the next slide here. So let's kind of talk about what's happening and what's involved, right? So again, what we're going to do is we're taking a little zoom in on the Provide platform, and we're going to read through some of the documentation that was provided in the baseline protocol repo, of course, right? So one thing to consider off the bat is that this Provide platform is built on a set of core microservices. So there's ident, for example, which is being showcased. There's Vault, which is being showcased. There's Nchain, which provides all the various APIs. That's being showcased. And the implementation of the baseline protocol over here for the BRI-1 leverages the Provide stack really for security, managing key material, signing transactions. It handles the transaction fees. And what's also interesting is the various APIs also deal with, for example, the iRegistry and the iVault interfaces that we saw. If we go over to the next slide, here's where we can start to now take a look at the reference implementation that was done. Think about the standards that Anais was explaining at the beginning of the presentation, right? You have your standard 1, which deals with the core. Then you have your standard 2, which deals with the APIs. And this is where you can really start to see how a company could begin to implement this for a POC or a pilot or a production. One thing that's important to mention is that during this reference implementation, again, it's a demo. It's not meant to be, you know, the end all, the be all, because there's some of the standards that aren't put into consideration, right? So as you could see, the component 5, 6, and 7, which is governance, security, considerations, and conformance, while we can talk to them, they're not really front and center, right? That's not really the purpose. The purpose is to showcase how you can leverage the baseline APIs, how you can leverage the communication component, how you can leverage the privacy and confidentiality, and also the agreement execution. So If we dive into that a little bit deeper, what you could see is that in the communication component, what we're noticing is, feel free to go to the links that I'm going to provide to you afterwards, and you can, take a look at this demo and, stop it and slow it down and, and really read the deployment steps. But you could see that authorization and authentication is happening, and that's via the iRegistry and the registry contracts. Message delivery has happened through the iMessaging service. You have another component for privacy and confidentiality that, that's being addressed over here. And when you take a look at the APIs, you have your IZK snark circuit provider, so on and so forth, along with iVault and Shield contracts. And in the component for agreement execution, right, this is where you have your blockchain, right? So this is your iBaseline RPC, your iBlockchain service, the Shield contract, verifier contract. So what's really important as a takeaway is this point right here. So again, I just want to bring this back. How do you implement the baseline protocol? Again, as always, we really encourage you to not start tech first, but really start business first. Think about your use case. Then there needs to be a provider build. Once you've built your provider, then you're going to need to connect and deploy that, right? So again, just kind of thinking through, 3 easy steps. First things first is you're going to need a baseline stack. You can start with the standard 1 and the standard 2 and take a look at what's done there. Just to call it out, a company like Provide Platform has already done that for you. So you can go and take a look at that. A lot of that work is contributed to the baseline protocol. That company has really put a lot of time and energy into making it super simple to just leverage their platform, which allows you to get that baseline stack. Then you also need to think about how are you going to take that baseline stack then and then connect that to your system of record, right? So we have the Envision connector in the middle and the system of record, where most of you will already be familiar with the system of record, whether it's SAP or it's Salesforce or Dynamics or a custom web portal or whatever, right? But what you may not be familiar with is the connector that we have on the market, which is our integration solution. And this was what we use in order to demo some of the first demos that was coming out from the baseline protocol to connect SAP and Dynamics 365. It's really that middleware that we can provide to help connect the baseline stack to the system of record. And just with that in mind, I'm not going to show you this demo over here, but there's a demo with the Envision connector in mind. Take note of this. It's bit.ly/Envision connector, or you could just go to any of the links that I'm going to share with you after that. But essentially, this is your integration hub to connect to, any system imaginable, and leveraging this baseline stack, for example, is that you don't have to compromise your privacy and, compliance, and you don't even have to, invite a new system to be built. You can keep your legacy system in place if that's the route that, the organization wants to go. And then, business as usual, but now you have these back-end services with everything that's connecting. So again, we really appreciate everyone for joining. Just to give, a 5-second plug on Envision Blockchain and how to think about us in the terms of the blockchain industry is that we really provide consulting and custom application development. So, just trying to tie everything together with what you heard here today. If there's any questions around, ideation, proof of concept, all the way through requirements gathering, mobile, web, UI, UX development, so on and so forth, that's really where a lot of organizations have engaged with us in the past. We leverage, a whole series of cloud and on-prem solutions, depending on what the flavor of the organization is. And then last but not least is that, even beginning with some sort of thought in mind is where we really like to say, let's take a step back from the technology and let's have a business workshop conversation. So here you could see a list on the right-hand side, a list of some of the workshops that we offer from, the baseline protocol through tokenization, all the way through IoT, AI, Discovery Day, so on and so forth. And also, last but not least, we do want to, hand this out to everybody. So here's just, baselining community cheat sheet over here with links and resources. You can see that we have links here so that you can easily navigate to the baseline protocol repo. There's some documentation that you can go ahead and click on from the videos, join the conversation on Slack, standards and specification scope, and along with the baseline protocol roadmap, which I think is going to be interesting for anyone that wants to check out what is actually going on within the baseline protocol and what projects are kind of spurring up from there. All right, well, look, thank you so much. Again, we really appreciate everyone for joining. We know how crazy it is during these times to jump onto a meeting with all the other meetings happening right now. So again, from the bottom of our hearts, we really appreciate the time that you spend here with Anais and myself. Thank you so much and have a great day. Bye.